On a bustling street in a lively but chaotic neighborhood, Ethan, a young boy, was making his way to school, his mind occupied with the daily worries of life. The sweltering heat and the constant sounds of honking cars and people chattering seemed to blend into the background as he walked past street vendors and hurried pedestrians. In his pocket, his father's old watch rested, broken and no longer ticking, but still holding a special place in Ethan's heart. It was a symbol of his father's belief in justice, a belief Ethan had inherited despite the struggles they faced. His father, Daniel, had been wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, and Ethan clung to the hope that one day the truth would come to light. As Ethan crossed a busy street on his way to school, his thoughts were far from the dangers of the day. He was focused on the unfinished chores back at home, the laundry his mother, Helen, had been working tirelessly on, and the feeling of helplessness that seemed to weigh on him. But today, something would change. At the street corner, he noticed Officer Rebecca, a familiar face who often smiled at the neighborhood kids. She was directing traffic, her slightly swollen belly a sign that she was pregnant. Ethan couldn't help but admire her determination to continue working even with a child on the way. Suddenly, a shout rang out from down the street, and Ethan turned to see a man careening toward Rebecca on a wobbly bike. The bike veered straight for her, and Ethan realized she hadn't noticed the impending danger. Time seemed to slow as the bike sped toward Rebecca, and the street, usually filled with noise, fell eerily quiet. No one moved. Everyone just watched, frozen, as the situation unfolded. Ethan's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he sprinted toward Rebecca, shouting, "Ma'am, look out!" His heart raced, but his focus was sharp. Just as the bike neared Rebecca, Ethan reached her, pushing her out of harm's way. The two of them staggered to the side and the bike crashed just a few steps away. The rider, breathless, but seemingly unharmed, lay on the pavement, and a small crowd began to gather, murmuring amongst themselves. Rebecca, her hand resting protectively on her belly, turned to Ethan, her face pale but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan, still trying to catch his breath, shook his head. "I just saw you couldn't move in time," he said. He wasn't sure what to do next, but a sense of relief washed over him. He had done the right thing. Ethan's life had never been easy. His father, Daniel, had been wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, leaving his family to struggle just to make ends meet. Ethan, though young, had inherited his father's sense of justice and an unshakable belief that truth would eventually prevail. Despite the hardships, he held on to his father's words, "Justice is something you can't give up on, even when no one believes in you." His father's watch, broken and silent, was more than just an old keepsake. It was a reminder of Daniel's unwavering faith in what was right, and it had become a symbol of Ethan's own fight for justice. Ethan's mother, Helen, worked tirelessly at a laundromat just to keep food on the table. The two of them, side by side, did their best to hold the family together. But it wasn't always enough. The system had failed them. Daniel's conviction for theft and accusation he had always denied had torn their lives apart. Ethan knew his father wasn't a criminal. He remembered the long nights Daniel had spent working hard to provide for them. "I'd rather lose my job than do something wrong," his father had always said. Yet, despite his integrity, Daniel had been convicted, and the system had turned its back on him. Each day, Ethan carried that burden with him. He crossed the busy streets, his mind occupied with worries about the unfinished tasks at home and his father's unjust fate. As he walked to school, his thoughts often drifted to what he could do to help his father. Little did he know that the decision he made that day, a simple act of courage, would be the first step toward changing his family's destiny. On that chaotic morning, Ethan saw Officer Rebecca, a familiar face in the neighborhood, directing traffic. She was pregnant, and Ethan couldn't help but admire her determination to continue working despite being heavily pregnant. But what he didn't know was that, in just a moment, his life would take a turn. As the usual hustle and bustle filled the streets, a man on a bike came barreling toward Rebecca, unable to control the wobbling handlebars. He was headed straight for her, and Rebecca didn't see it coming. Time seemed to slow down as Ethan realized no one else was moving. Instinct took over. He sprinted toward her, shouting for her to look out. In a heartbeat, he reached Rebecca and pushed her to the side just in time to avoid the crash. The bike clattered to the ground and Ethan stood, heart racing, watching as Rebecca took a deep breath, shaken but unharmed. In that moment, Ethan had no idea that this small act of courage would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything, starting with his father's case. Ethan never imagined that his simple act of bravery that day would set the course for an unexpected turn in his life. As he stood there trying to calm his racing heart, Rebecca, the pregnant police officer he had just saved, looked at him with wide eyes, full of gratitude. Her hand instinctively rested on her belly, and she managed to catch her breath just long enough to say, "Thank you." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He hadn't been sure if he'd done the right thing, but seeing her safe made him feel like he had. But the moment didn't end there. From the crowd that had gathered, a man emerged, striding quickly toward them. Ethan felt a mix of nervousness and confusion as the man approached. This wasn't just any man. It was Jack, Rebecca's husband, and the police chief. His face, usually stern, was etched with concern as he hurried toward his wife. Rebecca, still catching her breath, looked up at Jack and said, "I'm fine. This boy saved me from a bad accident. If it wasn't for him, things could have been much worse." Jack turned to Ethan, his eyes initially filled with suspicion but soon softening as he took in the genuine concern on the boy's face. Jack crouched down in front of Ethan, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, son," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy replied softly, his voice still carrying the weight of the moment. Jack nodded, his expression shifting from suspicion to something warmer. "Ethan, you saved my family today. I owe you more than you know." Ethan, still uncertain of how to respond, shook Jack's hand. In that moment, he realized he hadn't just saved Rebecca's life. He had made a connection that would soon change his family's future. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Rebecca, now standing up, turned to Ethan with a gentle smile. "You're not just brave," she said. "You're an amazing son. Don't lose hope." Ethan, overwhelmed but encouraged, nodded. Deep inside, he felt a flicker of hope. He had done the right thing, and somehow that made him believe that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still hope for his father. Jack's words still rang in his ears. He owed Ethan a debt, and Ethan hadn't even realized that his small act of courage would go on to change not only his life but the fate of his family. As Jack and Rebecca walked away, Ethan stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. He had no idea where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, things would finally change for the better. As the days passed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. After his courageous act of saving Rebecca, life returned to its chaotic rhythm. But one thing was clear to him: he couldn't let his father's wrongful conviction remain unchallenged. Daniel had been locked away for over a year for a crime he didn't commit, and while Ethan had always believed in his father's innocence, it was becoming harder to ignore the weight of the injustice that had been done to their family. His father's name, his dignity, and their future had all been stolen by a system that had failed them. One afternoon, while Ethan sat quietly at home, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could bring attention to his father's case, Jack, the police chief, unexpectedly showed up. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as Jack walked into their small apartment. Rebecca, who had been supporting Ethan from the beginning, stood beside him, offering silent encouragement. Jack's presence meant one thing. This wasn't just a visit. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jack began, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "Your father's case, Daniel Carter. There's something wrong with the way it was handled. I'm going to look into it." Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he processed the words. After everything, Jack was finally going to investigate what had happened to his father. Ethan had never expected this moment to come, and it overwhelmed him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Jack then placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder, looking him in the eye. "I can't promise anything, but I'll do what I can. I believe in your father, Ethan. I think he deserves a second chance, and I'm going to make sure the truth comes out." Ethan's hands trembled, but his heart swelled with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could right the wrongs that had torn their lives apart. As Jack left, Ethan felt a surge of emotion. It wasn't just about his father anymore, it was about justice. He couldn't ignore the gut feeling he had that there was more to his father's case than anyone realized. Something had gone terribly wrong, and it wasn't just his father's freedom that was at stake. It was the integrity of the whole system. With Jack's promise to reopen the case, Ethan realized that this was the beginning of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. His father's story, their family's story, wasn't just about a wrongful conviction anymore. It was about uncovering the truth and bringing justice where it had been lost. The days following Jack's promise to look into Daniel's case were a blur of hope and anxiety. Ethan couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and dread. He had always believed his father was innocent, but the weight of the corrupt system that had wrongfully imprisoned him seemed impossible to fight. Yet, Jack's words gave him a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could uncover the truth. Jack had been hard at work revisiting the case and combing through the evidence. The more he dug, the more he realized something didn't add up. The key piece of evidence, the surveillance footage, was suspiciously blurry at a critical moment, and the key card that had been used to access the warehouse on the night of the theft didn't match Daniel's employee ID. Jack could feel the gears in his mind turning, and with each discovery, his resolve to get to the bottom of the case grew stronger. Ethan's heart raced as he watched Jack, now fully invested in bringing his father's justice, walk into their home with the weight of new information. Jack had uncovered something big. With the help of his team, he had tracked down the original investigative team that had handled Daniel's case, including Lieutenant Mason, the officer who had overseen the investigation. Jack knew there was more to Mason than met the eye, and he wasn't ready to back down. As the investigation unfolded, the pieces began to fall into place. Ethan's mind raced as Jack showed him the details of what had been uncovered. Paul Stanford, the key witness who had testified against Daniel, had been coerced into giving false statements. The original surveillance footage had been tampered with, and critical evidence had been erased from the system. And the key card Ethan had found, the one his father had accidentally brought home the day of his arrest, had been used by someone else to frame Daniel. Jack's face was grim as he laid out the truth in front of Ethan. "We have a chance," Jack said, his voice low but determined. "We can reopen your dad's case, and we can clear his name." Ethan's eyes filled with tears, his emotions threatening to spill over. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't fighting alone. Jack, Rebecca, and even the police department's support had begun to crack open a case that had been sealed for too long. The road ahead would be long and dangerous, but Ethan knew it was the right thing to do. With Jack's team now on his side, the case began to unfold in their favor. The lies, the tampered evidence, and the corrupt actions of Lieutenant Mason were coming to light. The fight for Daniel's freedom had only just begun, but for Ethan, this moment was a turning point. One that would define not just his father's fate, but the future of their entire family. The journey to clear Daniel's name was far from over, but with each passing day, Ethan's hope grew. Jack's determination to uncover the truth had opened new doors, and every piece of evidence he uncovered brought them closer to justice. Ethan had always known in his heart that his father was innocent, but seeing the weight of the lies and corruption that had kept Daniel behind bars for so long was something he could hardly believe. For years, they had lived in the shadow of injustice, their lives marked by the pain of a wrongful conviction. But now, things were beginning to shift. As the investigation moved forward, Jack called Ethan into his office. The man who had once seemed like a distant authority figure had become someone Ethan looked up to, a protector, a guide in their fight for justice. Jack had been tirelessly working with his team to unravel the lies that had trapped Daniel, and now it was time for the truth to come out. The evidence was mounting: the tempered surveillance footage, the erased keycard data, and the false testimony from Paul Stanford, who had been coerced into lying about what he'd seen. It was all starting to add up, and Ethan could feel the weight of the case finally tipping in their favor. "I need you to be strong, Ethan," Jack said, his voice firm but compassionate. "We're going to court, and this is the moment we've been waiting for. Your dad deserves this. You deserve this." Ethan nodded, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. He had been waiting for this day for so long, but now that it was finally here, he wasn't sure what to expect. What if it wasn't enough? What if they couldn't undo the damage that had been done to his family? But as he looked into Jack's eyes filled with confidence and resolve, Ethan felt a surge of courage. He wasn't alone. His family wasn't alone. They had people who cared, people who were willing to fight for what was right. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was tense with anticipation. The prosecution had presented the original evidence, which seemed to confirm Daniel's guilt. But Jack wasn't backing down. When it was his turn, he confidently presented the new evidence, detailing the tampered footage and the coerced testimony. As Paul Stanford took the stand and admitted to being forced into giving false statements, the entire courtroom fell silent. The weight of the truth hung in the air. In the end, after much deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. Daniel's conviction was overturned. He would be released immediately. Ethan couldn't hold back his tears as he watched his father walk free, the handcuffs removed, and the chains of injustice finally broken. It was a moment that changed everything. For Ethan, his family, and the entire neighborhood, it was proof that justice wasn't just something that happened to other people, it was something they could achieve, no matter how long it took or how difficult the road. It wasn't just a victory for Daniel, it was a victory for Ethan's belief in justice, for his unwavering commitment to the truth, and for the hope that no matter how dark things may seem, the light of justice would always find a way through. As Ethan stood in the courtroom, his heart racing, he could hardly believe what was happening. His father, Daniel, had been wrongfully convicted for a crime he didn't commit, and after months of hard work, determination, and the unwavering belief that justice would prevail, the truth was finally coming to light. The courtroom was filled with tension as the judge delivered the verdict. Daniel's conviction was overturned. The chains of injustice that had bound their family for so long were finally broken. The crowd's murmurs turned to applause, but for Ethan, it wasn't just the verdict that mattered. It was the realization that, despite everything, they had never lost hope. When Daniel walked down from the stand, the handcuffs removed, Ethan rushed to him, his heart swelling with pride. His father, exhausted from the ordeal but with tears in his eyes, embraced him tightly. "I knew you'd never give up on me, Ethan," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You were my light in the darkest days." Ethan could hardly speak, his throat tight with emotion. He had always believed in his father's innocence, but the journey to this moment had been anything but easy. The road to justice had been long, fraught with challenges and doubts. But through it all, Ethan had learned something invaluable. Justice wasn't just about winning, it was about never giving up, even when the odds seemed impossible. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the world seemed determined to ignore the truth. This was a lesson that went beyond Ethan's family. It was a lesson for all of us. In a world filled with inequality, corruption, and injustice, it's easy to lose faith in the system. It's easy to feel like the fight for justice is hopeless. But stories like Ethan's remind us that change is possible even in the most difficult circumstances. Justice may take time, and the path to it is often filled with obstacles, but with determination, courage, and a willingness to stand up for what's right, we can make a difference. Ethan's journey didn't end with his father's exoneration. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He went on to become a lawyer, dedicating his life to helping those who had been wronged, just as his family had been. His story became a beacon of hope for others in his community, showing them that no matter where you come from or how impossible the fight may seem, justice is something that can be built, one step at a time. Ethan's legacy is one of courage, hope, and unwavering belief in justice. It serves as a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to change the world around us if we choose to fight for what is right. Just like Ethan, we can all be a light in the darkness, proving that, with enough perseverance, justice will always find a way.